What is going on, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube? My name is Vinny Vega, and today I got some Battlefield 1 closed alpha gameplay for you guys. The NDA just lifted for the Battlefield 1 closed alpha, which means I can now post pretty much whatever I want on the gameplay and the commentary. And it's about time if you ask me, because I have just under 600 gigs worth of gameplay just itching to make a video out of. But in today's video I want to focus on overall first impressions of the game and also some changes that were made between Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1. One thing's for certain, it's definitely a visual step up from Battlefield 4 and Hardline, and DICE did use the same photorealism scan that they used in Star Wars Battlefront, and it truly shows in this game. And just the sounds, the environment, it really does make you feel like you're in World War I. Let's talk about destruction for a moment. And a staple of Battlefield franchise is the destructible environment. And Battlefield 1, I feel like they stepped it up majorly compared to past Battlefields, and it doesn't feel as scripted as some Battlefields, and I'm pointing at Battlefield 4 and Hardline in particular. In Battlefield 4, the destruction was there, but it felt like it was, meant to do that a certain way, and it does it the same every time. In Hardline, the destruction was very minimal. A lot of buildings were just indestructible and you couldn't break them. But that's not really the case in Battlefield 1. There still is indestructible objects and walls and stuff, but for the most part you could pretty much go to town and just wreck everything. This includes blowing a hole in grassy fields, making yourself a little foxhole. Pretty much every wall is fair game. If I were to compare the destruction in BF1 to past Battlefields, I would say it's a healthy mix between Battlefield 3 and Bad Company, and I really like the feel of that. The only map that's available for the closed alpha at the moment is St. Quentin's Scar, and if this is any indication of what the rest of the maps are going to be like, I'm very happy with the results. This is definitely a very healthy mix of close quarters, long range, and everything in between. In Battlefield 4, it mainly focused on medium to long range combat, and it didn't really have that healthy balance. And I feel like that balance is there in Battlefield 1. Some of the ways the guns function are also very different. Take for example the submachine guns in Battlefield 1. In Battlefield 4, submachine guns can pretty much dominate medium to close range. However, in Battlefield 1 you have to choose your engagements a little bit more wisely and close the gap. It definitely adds a little bit more skill and strategy involved when using a submachine gun. In fact, there's a little bit more skill involved in most of the weapons in Battlefield 1. All the classes are mixed up a little bit differently than in past Battlefield games. From Battlefield 3 on, the medic class used to have assault rifles, which were always the most powerful and most usable guns in the game from most ranges. In Battlefield 1 that has changed drastically, and you're limited to semi-fire rifles in the medic class. And on the surface this may seem like the medic class is very weak, but the medic class is actually very strong when used in the right engagements. Keeping yourself close to your squad so you can heal your teammates when you need to, and also keeping your engagements at that medium sweet spot to use your rifles. The designated assault class is the one with the submachine guns, and also has shotguns as well. And this is also the only way to deal with tanks at the moment, or any other armored vehicles. The assault class carries an anti-tank grenade, which is basically a stick with a bunch of grenades on it, and it deals heavy damage to armor. Two of these will almost wipe out a tank entirely. The assault class also carries an anti-tank rocket gun, which you can engage tanks from longer ranges. And if you're feeling a little bit froggy, you can also out-snipe snipers with it on occasion.
Whoa, that's like fucking mean.
And when it comes to tanks, DICE has actually added the animation to getting into the tank or armored vehicles as well. This is a fine addition to the franchise, and I think Battlefield players have been asking for this for a while. I can't tell you how many times I've seen in comment sections or forums, someone would always mention it would be cool if you would actually have an animation for getting into vehicles. When exiting the vehicle, you would exit the same fashion as you would in other Battlefields where you just appear out of it. But getting in is a whole nother story. In fact, for instance, say you and an enemy player are racing towards an armored vehicle, you can actually shoot and kill that person while they're in the animation. And that's a cool element to the game. There's also a designated class just for vehicles. If you enter a biplane or a tank or an armored vehicle from the deployment screen, you will have this class equipped automatically. It's basically just a pistol and you've got a hammer to repair your tank. And in addition to that, you can also repair the vehicle much faster than you would otherwise. And you can actually repair your vehicle while inside of your tank or your biplane instead of going out and repairing it manually, although you do have that option still. And of course, when you're repairing a vehicle, you cannot do anything at the moment. So if you're in a biplane, you want to be at a high altitude so you don't crash into the ground. And for a tank, you want to be in a safe location. I think this adds more incentive for players to be less reckless in vehicles and adds more skill overall to the game experience. And DICE does emphasize more teamwork when it comes to the heavy tanks and also the armored vehicles as well. There are many seats in each vehicle and everybody has a designated gun or cannon depending on what the vehicle is. And when you have a team working together, you're just a whole squad of just amazing firepower when used right. Unfortunately, in the closed alpha, there's still a little bit of lone gunning going on, and it's not utilized as it should always, but when it does happen, it is pretty amazing. DICE has also made some major changes to the way spotting works and the minimap. Now, I'm sure if you played past Battlefields, or just about any game for that matter that has a minimap with red dots as enemies on it, I'm sure you've spent a lot of time chasing those dots or those spicy Dorito chips in Battlefield. In fact, I can tell you right now, I spend probably 80%, 90% of the time looking at that map. And a lot of times that loses focus on what's in front of you when you do that. Well, in Battlefield 1, it's a little bit different. You don't necessarily show up on the map when you're firing your weapon. In fact, you have to be spotted in order to show up on the map. And DICE has also gotten rid of passive spotting. And passive spotting in Battlefield 4 and Hardline, and I believe it was in 3 if I'm not mistaken, is the act of when you're just simply looking in the direction of an enemy and they show up on the map. Well, DICE has gotten rid of that. And I think that's a good thing. So you have to actually actively spot enemies in order for them to show up on the map. In addition to that, there's no direction on where the enemy is facing. Instead of having those little arrows, you now have little red squares. So you really don't know what direction the enemy is facing. And if they're far enough away, you'll see a little red semicircle on the minimap showing you what direction the enemy is coming from. And every once in a while, tanks will show up as squares too, so that's something you have to be mindful of. So don't just rush in thinking it's an infantry, because you might just run into a tank and have yourself a bad day, especially if you're not running in an assault class. If you take a look at a side-by-side comparison with the BF4 map compared to the BF1 map, the BF1 map looks a lot cleaner, and it's not as cluttered as the BF4 map was. It gives you just the information you need, like do you need to defend a flag or do you need to cap a flag, and that kind of gives you an idea if you're playing Conquest where the enemies are going to be spawning at. For being at this stage of the game in development, Battlefield 1 is coming out very nicely. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more changes made to the game by the time an open beta hits. And as of right now, we don't know when that's going to be. There's definitely far more things that I want to talk about in Battlefield 1, and I want to do some detailed breakdowns on some of the classes and some of the other mechanics in the game. So let me know your thoughts down below, and for those of you guys that are playing the alpha right now, what do you think of it? Hope you guys have a badass day today, and I'll see you on the next one.